it's documented, and do a roll call. And then, of course, any other comments from an introductory standpoint, anyone else that needs to be introduced, Madam Director, if you would, at that point.
Sure. Roll call. Mr. Addison.
Present.
Mr. Byerly.
Here.
Ms. Haley. Chairman Holland.
Here.
Ms. O'Bannon. Mr. Peterson.
Here.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I will just acknowledge that Dan Van Dornick is on the screen here. He is participating virtually because he's with his other client on Tuesday, so he's joining us today. But Dan, just to do a sound check, can you hear us?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Dan.
Okay, any other comments regarding virtual participation? Anyone virtually participating?
No, we don't. So we are
Gotcha.
just live streaming today on YouTube,
Excellent.
but no members of the committee are virtual.
Okay, thank you much. Item 2, administrative items, selection of a chair for fiscal year 22. What is the body's pleasure in this regard?
I move that Mr. Holland continue to chair this committee.
Second. It's been moved and properly second. Any more nominations? Hearing none, nominations are closed. Thank you for the opportunity and honor to serve. Certainly it's a pleasure to represent and do all I can for the committee, and more importantly for you as well. We also should think about contemplate a vice chair, which will be helpful in case I'm unavailable and incapacitated. And if y'all can do it, I won't just say if you want to. All of you could be vice chair, deputized as vice chair, if you want to do
One
that.
of us not here.
Okay. Okay, as vice chair.
Yeah, let's put this page in that.
Yeah, this page in there.
She's
Okay.
not on the committee.
She's not.
Yeah, I'm here now in place of this page, so that's a no. She left us, yeah. But it's something to think about, if not today, ongoingly. I think it's a good idea. Would you agree? Would y'all agree, or what your opinion on that? I just put it forth just in case. I appreciate the give consideration to whomever, or what can happen too is that when the chair's not here, anyone just step in and say, okay, let's forward your head, let's move forward. Anyone can do that and lead. I think that's able, and I think that's a wonderful thing to have such outstanding people on the committee to do so. But thank you so much, and I appreciate your confidence in me to do a decent job and do it well. June minutes, if there are no other comments or nominations on our June meeting minutes, page 3 of our report. Are there any corrections or updates to the June minutes? And if not, may I have a motion? Second, then moved in proper second. Any additional discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, sign of aye. Ayes have it. That motion carries and the minutes are approved and adopted. Thank you so very much for the June 22nd minutes. Item 3, financial report, our June financial statements.
So I will just do a little bit of a highlight, and then I think that Dan will be available to go through this in greater detail, but just to share, June looks good. Dan will walk through the specifics of the balance sheet and the profit and loss statement, but I will just simply say that this is a set of statements that are through the month of June. So just realize that the year end, cumulative 30th are still forthcoming. So we've still got some transactions that are getting processed and everything like that. So Dan, do you want to cover the July 2020 through June 2021 financial statements?
Sure. The overall statement, starting with the profit and loss on pages 5, 6, and 7. We'll start with the bottom line up front. And that is your June 21 still had a sufficient net surplus, 15,000. But as you can see across, that entire bottom line, that's lower than the previous few months. The primary driver of that is that revenues were less than what they had been. If you switch over to page 5 and try to find that trend on one of the lines where the revenue went down, you won't see it because part of the trend that's in there is that a significant amount of pass-through expenditures were recognized as both expense and as revenue. But as Martha can say, tell you the activity, the billable activity went down. It didn't go down more than expected. It was an expected decrease given some vacations and some other factors. But that was the primary driver there. And so for the year, remember when I came on at the very end of February, there was a lot of consternation as to, what would this year look like and, what's going on with it from a financial performance perspective. The organization's come a long way and a lot of stabilization has occurred, due to leadership and just getting focused back on, the drivers of your finances, which is actually your work product, the hours spent on billable activity. Martha and her team has done a nice job of, getting that clarified. There's also a lot of work in just, simple cleanup of your accounting record. And so a lot of that occurred in that earlier timeframe, that January, February, March. So what we're looking at in April, May, June are probably clearer results for those particular months. As Martha indicated, this close was done the same way that we've done, the previous monthly closes. So you have 12 months here, but there are still some, end of year things that need to be done in order to close it, to make it ready for audit, which, may affect this bottom line number again. I don't expect anything to occur that would eliminate that $118,000 surplus. The only item that I really see going down is some corrections to some, billings as we finish billing for June 30th. Some other corrections working with, some vendors to make sure that we have it properly accounted for. But then there's also the, we need to receive the funds in a timely fashion in order to actually recognize them as revenue. So there's a collection factor as well. Again, I don't expect that there should be significant changes, but those are the types of things we'll be keeping our eye on as we're getting ready for audit for Mark Rhodes and his group, to do their work, but also as, this month and a little bit into August, close out as we collect revenues that have been accrued, as we bill activity that's been worked through June 30th. Those things will, clarify, the bottom line, and, we'll adjust to, the formal GAAP basis of accounting as those things occur. The balance sheet itself is, still in very good shape. Moving to pages 8 and 9. Your cash balance and your account receivable balances are still, strong. Given that this is a June 30, there's, some reduction in it from last month, but that's just due to the nature of, the month. Billed revenues have been collected. And so when we get to the, final billings of June 30th, we'll get those accrued into the books, for the final year end. As there's adjustments, we'll get those accrued into the books. So looking at a May 31st to a June 30th, that's not anything to be concerned about. Where you're landing at June 30th is in a very strong position. If you go down to the second page, page 9, This always seems to be the favorite part of these discussions. If you look in the right-hand column under balance sheet is the financial statement that's made on a more traditional government accounting basis of accounting. And so you see that your fund balance is actually 1.3 million, which is well above the $1 million goal or target that had been previously set by the board. And so that's where you see that number, 1.3 million.
Any
Point
questions?
questions?
Okay, please, I'm sorry, I thought you had paused.
I've got a question.
You ready for questions, Mr. Van Dorn? Is this a good time for questions? Are you finished?
I'm finished with what I prepared to say. So
Okay, very,
now is the time.
yes, thank you.
This is simply continuing my education for a non-accountant, but I'm looking at page 7, the last couple of lines before that. First of all, I do not know how we have a negative income. The income would be positive, but yet you've got other expenses and other income that obviously balance out. Why is it even there?
Classifications for the statement with the way that government GAAP is structured. You see the items there are capital expenses and transfers. Those are your normal operating expenses or operating revenue. They're not your recurring activity. And so kind of the strategy here with the statement is to separate those things that are not part of your regular activity, separate that out from that which is your regular activity, your operating activities.
Yeah, I see. His question is, if you look, I think this is the question. For example, you look at September and you look at primarily August 2020, we're looking all the way back. You have a negative $20,000 of net income. And maybe what I'm thinking might be helpful is to put net income and then in parentheses, net loss. Since the net loss is shown in those months, there might be a way to accommodate that. Do you concur, Mr. Van Dorn?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I understood the question then. I'm sorry. Definitely expect that capital inclusive of the result.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be looking for that. Okay, that'd be great. Any other questions or comments, sir?
What creates the net loss? Just my first
Yeah,
meeting,
good point.
just to make sure I understand exactly what creates the net loss in those areas, because it's a good question.
Yeah, you could go through each individual item, but basically those revenues are less than the all the expenses noted on page. All the expenses are noted on page 7, where you get down to your net incomes, brackets, net loss, and varying months. For example, if you want to go through June, but in the prior months, there was a number of issues. We had some corrections to last year that were done in December that corrected that. Is a big thing on that. I think will be helpful. And you have a lot of data here. But I have any other questions? I have a couple of questions. Number one question is, I'm going to detail, going to the top. I noticed that our net income from May went from 32.5 to 15.8 thousand dollars, so about 50% drop. But one question I have looking at that is, I'm looking at the significant change in June's pass-through and matching. I believe you mentioned that pass-through and matching account went from 23,000 to 131.3 thousand on page 7, right? You see that?
Yes.
My question is, why would rent drop from 20,000 to 11,000 in the month of June? Are we prorating June's rent, or what are we doing there?
Yeah, it reflects an annual entry that's normally done by the auditor.
Okay,
I don't know if you're on your balance sheet at the very bottom of page 8.
okay,
You see a long-term liability titled deferred rent liability.
yeah, I see 13,000 deferred rent liability.
That's correct. That amount was about $8,000 or $9,000 higher last month. For the term of your lease, there's an amount that was either prepaid or forgiven. I don't know specifically how it was created, but essentially for the entire term of your lease, that amount gets reduced in order to benefit all the periods of your lease. And that was what, a 5-year window. And so just the way your accounting has been done in years past, that's an entry that's been done by your auditor. You know, I saw it, and as part of closing the books, I entered it there. But the amount that was actually paid for rent in June was the same amount as previous months. It's just lower in your month to month comparison because I actually recognized the portion that was previously deferred.
So 11 and 13, 20, roughly $24,000 total. And I compared 11,000 plus I add 13.1, I get roughly $24,000. And I can see the adjustment. I guess you're making an adjustment from 20,875 to 24. That's about almost $3,000 to $4,000 adjustment in the rent for the month of June. Do you follow me? I'm looking at 11,000 on the income statement, profit and loss. And I'm looking at deferred rent liability of $13,119. And I add the two expense plus deferred, I get $24,000.
Okay, 13,000.
13,000, which is deferred rent liability. 28.
Right. That's the remaining amount of the deferred rent liability. That
Okay.
will be there end of your current lease term, which is what, October 31st, 2022.
Okay.
So the amount that was actually reduced in your rent is the difference between the rent expense shown in May of 20,000 less June amount of 11,000. But that was only pursuant to a book entry.
Okay. As long as we can explain it.
Correct.
And defend it.
And defend it, that's more important. We got to defend it. That's the pressure on me to defend it. But anyway, so I hear you. I just want to make sure you call your attention to that as we look at financials for the full commission and for this committee, more important. So anyway, looking at on the balance sheet on page 9, we have 250. I believe I can see the numbers, but that and the fund balance there, but liabilities and equity, that should be the total current liabilities, or your total liabilities are $250,000. Plus it should include equity because you have liabilities and equity of $1.3 million. Would that be, is that 250 correct? That you're showing on the second column of the balance sheet.
It is not. It's a mistake that I made in Excel when I created the second column.
Oh, yeah, that I agree. Okay, as long as you see it.
Yeah, the 250,000 plus the total net position, the 1.3.
1.3, yeah, that's correct. They should be added together.
That's correct.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, any other questions? I haven't looked at more details of it, but the good news is, I guess the good news is that we have income, not a loss.
Yeah.
Mr. Peterson.
There's some money there.
There's some money there. There's some money there. And you mentioned the receivables and the collections thereof, the cash coming in. The cash position looks relatively strong, looking at the 497,000 and the associated receivables of 508,000. Looking at the cash position, it looks relatively strong with the unassigned fund balance of 1.3 million. as seen there. So I just want to point that out, and I just want to point that out. Any other questions or concerns that you might have, or anyone might have for that matter? Because our job is to go through and try to work through as much as we can, not to be perfect, not to find everything, but to find some things.
I would suggest correcting that error before it comes to the floor.
Yes, sir. Automatically assume. Yes, sir. Thank you much. All right. Other questions or concerns regarding the income statement balance sheets? At this point, as we prepare these numbers for the auditor to start looking at and then making any adjustments that need to be made relative to pension liabilities and of course any other deferred liabilities as noted long terms there for the auditors to look at. All right, Mr. Van Doren.
All right. Very good.
All right. Yes, sir. Other questions or comments from anyone regarding that? Hearing none, I assume that we'll make adjustments on the June financials and disseminate those. Is it a good idea to disseminate before the meeting or during the meeting, or what would be your pleasure?
It should be in packet for everybody.
Impact for everybody? Okay, very good. So for all of us then. Okay, and the committee, or the full committee. Thank you, Mr. Van Dorn. We appreciate that. Thank you, Madam Director. All right, number 4, discussion items and updates here. So it's always good to be updated. Love updates. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Dan and I will kind of tag team this discussion, but I'll kick it off first and just acknowledge Mr. Peterson and Mr. Byerly have already seen these slides because it's very close to what you saw in the presentation at the executive committee, but I thought for the benefit of the finance committee, it would be good to go through them. You've got them in hard copies here, so I would encourage you to look through them. I'm going to kind of skip ahead to what really is applicable. Just to orient you though, we've started this tradition last fiscal year and have carried it through. This is just a really high level look at, where are we going? What are we focusing on as an agency, and how do we stay kind of connected to that direction? So see, among the key imperatives, preserving our financial position is number 1, intentionally there so that we continue to keep our eye on the ball with that. And there are a couple of other objectives within these imperatives that I think relate to the work of the finance committee this year. And one of the things Mr. Holland asked Dan and I to look at was kind of a schedule and a flow of things that we need to keep on our attention this coming fiscal year so that we keep the ball moving forward, so to speak. So as I sit with these key imperatives, and again, the detail on the slides are there in front of you for you to look at. If you have questions or any kind of feedback, I certainly would invite that. Let's see here. Hold on a second. I'm in the wrong place. Sorry, hold on. Yeah, okay. All right. I'm on track here.
Good.
So as I sit with these key imperatives, I really kind of wanted to take a look at, well, what are the areas where the finance committee, is going to be guiding the work? And so certainly in that imperative number 1, also in imperative number 3, that imperative really is about, quite frankly, driving revenue. So how do we build the demand for services that brings revenue into the organization to keep us going forward? And then finally, obviously, we all know that we have this discussion upcoming around our space needs. And so the financial implications of a new office lease are significant. It's one of the larger expenditures outside of personnel. It is the largest expenditure outside of personnel. So obviously, the finance committee has been committed to this topic, and I hope we'll continue to be committed to that. So what I thought I would do is kind of walk through how we're thinking about priorities for this coming fiscal year, and try to work towards sort of setting an agenda and a flow for meetings so that we don't overwhelm your time, but also keep the pace on what we need to do. So on the screen, I just kind of, wanted to talk through kind of the particular objectives within those key imperative areas. Obviously, achieving a successful audit for fiscal year 2021, that's a major focus for this current quarter. And we'll be coming back to this committee at your October meeting. So Dan is doing a lot of work behind the scenes with Diane and I think Mr. Holland will be meeting with the auditor just to kind of keep that process going, but that's a big focus for the first quarter. As you know, also we have a lot of activity happening in the agency, and so assuring that we have our top-notch finance team in place is important. We've talked before in meetings about the potential implications of our work with the CBTA and what the decision-making around CBTA personnel might have impacts on our agency. And so we're watching that closely. Mr. Peterson is on the CBTA personnel committee, and I'll mention other members of the committee on that CBTA personnel committee also serve on the commission board. So I think that the interests of all are certainly probably being considered in that process. So I think in the meantime, we are working to fill the positions that were approved by the board. And while they're not directly related to finance, it definitely helps to make sure that the capacity of the agency overall is where it needs to be to meet our demands. Dan has been working on kind of an analysis of where we've been. To be frank, some of the challenges and pitfalls that we have experienced in the way that our financial management system is currently designed and functioning, and making that transition with the new fiscal year to be able to build a much more dynamic reporting system, to be able to improve internal communication with management, but also for the communication with the committee and to the board. So you will see a different, modest difference in the way that the financial reports are produced for July 1 going forward. Hopefully a little bit easier to read. As Mr. Holland noted, lots of data in our financial reports, but we want to try to create useful reports, maybe kind of more of a dashboard look so that it's easier to kind of look. And then of course the committee will always have the detail to go back to look at the individual line items and figures. So those are really in that first key imperative around the financial priorities. But as I mentioned, increasing demand for services, that is a revenue driver for us. And so making sure that not only are we staying on mission, but that we're undertaking projects that make good financial sense for the agency. So that is a priority. Continuing to make sure that, as we've talked about many times in this committee before, we're being compensated for the whole of the work that we're doing and not sort of losing on the revenue side in that. And so that has been a focus and want to continue to do that. So I think one of the things I'd like to do is to be a little bit more explicit with this committee as we undertake these projects about kind of the financial rationale for why we're undertaking this, what the implications are and that kind of thing, just so that the committee can become a little bit more engaged in some of that business decision making. And then finally, as I mentioned, we want to make sure that our decisions around our physical office space going forward are not only reflective of who we are today, but who we are tomorrow and how we want to, represent ourselves in the community. And so it is, I think, very much in this day and age and the post-COVID world, very much that where we choose to site our office has implications not only on you, but our staff and how we function. So kind of more to talk about in a moment, but I'll refer you to the schedule that we have. We've kind of tried to take a look at this, and this is truly a discussion item for you, but taking to heart some of the discussions that I've had with Mr. Holland and really trying to become a little bit more focused. So we're trying to set agendas to be much more kind of objective based and have activities that we're moving through and not lose track of priorities along the way. We want to make sure that we're designating time in your committee meetings to really dig deeper into some certain subject matter. So as an example, budget time, we want to make sure that we dedicate a specific meeting to budget. And so you'll see that reflected in the schedule. We also want to make sure that we designate specific time to kind of dig into the mechanics of our operations. We do function a little bit differently than, say, your local government finances. And so I want to make sure that that information is available to committee members. And so we've set up in the proposed schedule, so sort of these orientation sessions that kind of pull out of the monthly financials and just sort of talk through the mechanics of how things operate. And, if you want to nerd out and that would be a great opportunity to do that. But we still want to hold steady to quarterly reporting and analysis so that we're keeping that kind of fiduciary responsibility of the board. available to the board, and the finance committee is actively engaged in that. So that's sort of the structure that I've put together as Dan and I have sat down, and he has a very detailed spreadsheet that sits behind this of kind of a work plan, but this is the high level of how we think it can relate to a meeting schedule for you. So we are proposing that we back ourselves back. Before 2021, we were meeting on a quarterly basis, and so we are recommending, after talking with Mr. Holland, that we move back to that. We think that from a staff perspective, that'll enable us to provide some richer reports for you each quarter, and it'll be able to give you kind of a more realistic view of kind of the cash flow, if you will, since we operate on many of our programs on a quarterly reimbursement basis. And so you'll see that we've got meetings proposed for, of course, this July, then again in October, January, April, and then next July to be the regular quarterly meeting where we would review our financial reporting. You'd have a dashboard for each quarter, and then the cumulative, we do a budget update. We have other kind of project related updates and discussion, but try to kind of manage the agenda so that it's a manageable but meaningful agenda each time we meet. We're also proposing that we have other sessions, I'll say, scheduled throughout the year that can help to sort of focus on specific priorities. So the first of those is on August 12th. We do have a workshop scheduled with the executive committee, and all members of the finance committee would also be invited to attend that. It's a workshop with our consultant team, Baskerville, to help us really work with the executive committee to think about what are the space needs and expectations that we have for how the organization would function. Spoiler, it'll get a little bit into, kind of what do board members really think about when they think about our presence in the community, hours of operation, the whole concept of kind of the hybrid remote telework in office, those kinds of things. We'll get into meeting hosting. I will tell you that for the last, albeit they have been virtual, but for the last about 7 months, we've been averaging around 20 meetings a month that we're hosting between the commission itself, the TPO, the CBTA, the Emergency Management Alliance. So this meeting space, while it might have its deficiencies, when we're back in person, it is a highly used space. And so how we make sure that that is a good representation of the commission. And I know that there have been discussions in the past about whether or not that meeting space should be on premise with the staff or it should be kind of out in the community. And so we're going to try to suss out those topics, as it certainly, you can imagine this square footage is expensive. And so really trying to figure out the return on that investment to make sure that it's worthwhile for us to maintain it under roof, or if it's a better proposition to have it externally located. Then
a space like this, we're hosting a lot of meetings that really are not is there any payment for the space, use of the space by the organizations?
Yes and no, simply because when we build the TPO and the CBTA and the Emergency Management Alliance, we're incorporating our indirect costs into an applied rate. So we're not assessing a per meeting charge to those organizations, but they are contributing to the overall indirect costs for the agency. Yeah. It's a good point to make though, because that is a potential revenue stream that we have not explored for the times that we're not using, kind of for our core operations. The space, would we want to think about, that as an option. LMR occasionally uses our space. We do not charge for that. It's about twice a year, something like that. Yeah. But that's really the requests that are made are typically for things kind of more within our core of operations. We've got orientation sessions sort of proposed here. These dates would be flexible for your schedule, but frankly, from a staff planning perspective, it just kind of helps us. So if there were topics that you wanted to kind of dig into, it could be less formal of a session, but could be a chance for us to be able to dig in. Dan has been brainstorming some ideas around, how could we start to have some greater consistency in how we talk about things like fund balance or indirect costs, or some of these other things that we throw around in the meetings, but it just, I think, sometimes feels a little bit like we're glossing over it. And so we can have those orientation sessions to kind of talk through. Certainly it would be a time to talk through kind of, like we did last time about just kind of what's our process for the treasurer's role and some things like that, just to be able to build that additional confidence. So we've incorporated those into the schedule as well. So, I mean, this is kind of the plan that we wanted to propose to you. It's slightly fewer meetings, but in sort of in recognition of your busy schedules and trying to think this through, we think that this is a schedule that can fulfill kind of the needs that we have. There are specific junctures, as you know, during the fiscal year that, decisions have to be made. And so we want to make sure that we've got adequate time for the finance committee to meet in advance of those decisions going through the board. But we think that quarterly schedule with, frankly, one extra meeting in May to really focus in on budget can suit those needs. So.
Yeah, I think it's some great point. Other comments?
2 years ago, I wouldn't have agreed with only having 4 ribbons, because a lot has been done.
It has been.
To correct a lot of things. I feel kind of more comfortable with us.
I agree. I concur. I'm thinking along the same lines you are. Thank you. No. Yeah, I just want to applaud you. First of all, thank you for the excellent presentation, look back that you did at the last commission meeting. Overall financial results, I thought that was excellent. How you led us from where we were to where we are, so to speak. You did a tremendous job of that. I'm glad you did it too. You did an excellent job of that. I really applaud you. For laying out the financial priorities as well. And I agree completely with the idea that when we have budget sessions, that we have ample time to flush through details and get to the details, as you mentioned, about the budget items so that we can flush them out. I think your point's well taken. I appreciate that very much. So I applaud you for that. Certainly the priorities and the schedule, I think we've come a long way this year, as you pointed out to the full commission last time. And also, just a few questions or comments. One is, want to reiterate the importance of head count, budget versus actual going forward. We want to look at staffing and how staffing is related, comparative analysis of that head count, particularly due to all the additional work you all do for CBTA, because we don't want you to overwork, and we want to make sure that now looking back on last year, where our projections and charges are appropriate and in line and in order. And I think we need to think about that. Was it appropriate? The estimations, the percentages of head count, as you mentioned to Mr. Peterson, I think that's an excellent time for us to look at that going forward, so that we'll not, and as you mentioned earlier too, which I thought was a great comment about the cost, the revenue and expenses of additional work you take on, particularly a cost benefit analysis for us, on the financials, but also in not just quantitative, but qualitative. How does it benefit us? Cost benefit analysis, I think, is so very important from that standpoint. And then adjustments we need to make. And also continuing view on cash and cash investments. We talked about the cash invested, what is interest earned and those sorts of questions. As we get up staff, hopefully, and that's another thing, another question, where are we going with respect to the appropriate staffing on the financials, whether you have a director or the team. I think y'all have done a tremendous job this year. Where are we going and what's the scheduling and timing thereof from your financial, in the financial area. It gives you relief, because I know it puts a lot of pressure on you, Ms. Heater, when you have to do all of this. You did a lot of work back. I keep thinking about January and February and all you went through with projections you had to come up with and recommendations you had to make on what we should be doing financially deals to just where we are today. So I just want to applaud you, I think, for that. And of course, in further constant updates as we continue to move forward on our location updates. Where are we relative to moving to a new location? Is it feasible? Where are your needs? Are your needs continuing to be pretty similar, or would your needs increase? And we talked at the last meeting about the importance of using maybe localities to meet in and meet about issues particularly pertinent to them. Whether you need space in Chesterfield and Rico, Richmond, Hanover, what have you, those kind of needs. I know I'm throwing a lot out at you, but basically, those are some thoughts as we think about the financial priorities of where we are. But the good news is we are financially very I'm really pleased with where we are financially because I was very concerned in January and February. So what we might be December, it was somewhat a major concern. I'll just say, leave it at that. So that was basically some things I just want to say. But I applaud you, outline the schedule and keeping things focused. And like we have meetings, having it such that we can devote appropriate time to, like, for example, location meeting, budget meetings, and other issues of importance in terms of software and things like that. The committee, I know we discussed a new software system. Where are we with those kind of issues that can be brought to the forefront? What should we be doing financially? We're in a fortunate, far better financial position, but we could afford software was needed and beneficial. And that really helps a lot with the work-life balance for Mr. Van Doren and certainly you all as well, and Diane and you. So I think that's important to throw out. So excuse me for ramming on, but I just had a lot to say. I hope that's helpful and not burdensome.
It is. I mean, I think it is an aggressive work plan, but in talking with Dan, I think if we're working systematically through each of the priorities, it's doable. I mean, it's more than doable. I took some notes while you were talking, and certainly we will continue to incorporate for the board packet of financials, the narrative that you've had good feedback on Dan's work last month on that, and including the tables and charts and with the FTEs, the approved versus filled, and the hours allocation, and things sort of like this line of business, kind of programmatic business reports. You mentioned the software, Dan. I don't know if you want to speak to that, but we do have that slotted in here, really kind of coming to you in January, but opening that discussion with you in October around the financial information system and advising on that. I think we want to get through the audit, have Dan kind of see that for the agency. But Dan, do you want to speak to that a little bit and just summarize maybe some of the things you have so far?
Yeah, I think that kind of the points that I've developed in my mind as I've been looking at Plan RVA, your information needs, the way that management likes to look at things, and then also, what's an effective way to get things done. Currently, your access database is where you collect time. And then where you collect your financial information is in QuickBooks. So they don't integrate. There are information systems that integrate those two features, and given, especially this last year, where you can see just how closely your personnel activity drives your financial results and how important that relationship is. Having a system where they naturally come together is important. It's of significant value. The structure of your accounting system doesn't necessarily, QuickBooks is a broad use package that has been adapted to your use. There are systems that are created for entities like yours, which would make that piece a little bit more natural. So Martha used the term line of business. You're essentially a professional services firm with a couple of specialties. Emergency preparedness, transportation, environmental are the three that come to mind, most readily for me. So how do each of those programs, how do each of those lines of business affect any other one? You have grants that support each of those lines of businesses, but they don't cover everything. Each one has at least some level of local match, monies that your local organization has to put in. So how do you best manage those funds to know that you don't have any big surprises coming, that you're using them effectively? So that's another very significant management tool. How are we leveraging all of our local money? Your member dues, the special assessment. And then thirdly, so much of your funding is through contracts, grants, things that require a special level of management. And, to do it well, does require I'll restart that statement, that thought. Your grants management are being managed, but they're being managed by each individual program manager or grant manager. There is some central administration involved. But as far as actually connecting that piece with all of your other pieces, your budget piece, your time piece, and your actual financial performance piece, your accounting piece, there are too many, gaps between those, 3 or 4 very key pieces of your management needs. And so there are accounting systems that are actually, or information systems that go beyond just accounting, but are actually truly information, where you're connecting all of those pieces, that, the source of your funds and how to manage that, the source of your production, which is your people. And it's not just, creating paychecks, it's how do we manage our people's time, making sure that it's done most effectively. And it's the, how do we manage all of these resources together, and how does it convert into our financial performance? And, that's where I see that you're getting by at this point with what you have, with the tools that you have. But it does appear as though there are opportunities to connect these things to help the organization, come to another level. Help the managers manage better, help the executives lead better, help the board levels. You know what your accountability is. You can then prove it. You can then sell it. You can promote it, that you're doing things well. And this is, and this is what we can show you as to how we're doing it well.
Thanks, Dan. That was well said.
Yeah, tremendous. Dan, I really appreciate it. I followed very closely all your words and all you were saying, and it really positions us for the future, for now and the future. And that is critically important. I think that we are attentive to that. So we appreciate your insight and research, and also recommendation on system or systems that should be used to do the work better and to track better and to report better. And that will help, I think, us in better reporting with regard to the income statement, balance sheet, and even whether we have a scorecard or balanced scorecard, just how we report that and break that data down so it can be easily deciphered and communicated to not only us, the guys who are accountants, but to everybody, so that it can be easily read by all non-accountants, which is the true test of the systems and information. So I agree. Well said.
Thank you.
Any other Peter or any
Yeah,
comments?
just, input about, the schedule seems like it's.
I'm going to ask a question that we have not really put on here, but I'm somewhat concerned because our lease is running out.
Yes.
Where are we on these
That's what
facilities? I'm sitting here concerned that we might be getting ourselves into, there's a lot of time that takes place if we have to do a bit of a new spade, doing something here.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing our time frame get
Sure.
shorter and shorter. I'm not sure where we are.
Okay. I'll get that update. August 12th, we have that work session with the executive committee and finance, and Mr. Davey from public outreach is also planning to attend that workshop. That is the critical step in the process to make sure that our space plan is congruent with the board's expectations. From there, between August 12th and I would say mid-October or the October board meeting, we will be putting together the space fit plan for this group and the executive committee to evaluate. And at that point in time, we're in the window to be able to shop that space fit plan with not only this property owner and manager, but others out in the market. And so the goal would be that whether, if we are in a relocate strategy, the lease would be negotiated by March of 2022, so that we would have about 6 months before our lease expiration here. And certainly if the renegotiate option is what is chosen, then we would have the ability to renegotiate and move that timeline forward even more quickly. I would suspect that a renegotiate would enable us to achieve a new lease prior to the expiration of this lease, and any kind of construction or related improvements would be done before next October. So.
I fully appreciate everything you said,
Uh-huh.
but I'm not too sure that we are really, we've got to emphasize, this is a tight time.
It is.
To get there, we're talking just barely over a year
Yes.
to maybe having to design, find, and renovate. This is another step. That's not a lot of time.
Understood. Yes.
So hopefully, have we done anything more than a verbal design at this point?
We have,
The program, has the architects gone through the program?
we have two programs for this particular footprint to reprogram the square footage here. It is based on our current staffing, a square footage need of about 10,000 square feet. We have not done any space programs that could be dropped into another location.
Okay, well, I'm not talking about necessarily a drawing, but I'm talking, when I say a program, I'm talking about a verbal description of what all of our needs are
Yes.
gonna be. Not just on what we have now, but on where we intend to go. So that's gonna be very critical.
We have the staff perspective of that. The board, the executive committee
We'll have that
conversation
for
in
us.
August 12th will be the conclusion, I'll say, of that needs
Very
list.
good.
So, yeah. Because we want to make sure that the work that staff has done with the architect so far fits the expectations that the board has.
Okay, I just want to make sure that these things were ongoing, because I'm seeing a short time. Okay, the short time frame getting shorter every week.
The time moves very quickly.
Yes,
And you're there.
I feel like it's around the corner and we're not prepared. So we need to pick up the pace.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And so I also am reminded from our meeting, Ms. Haley wants to also join us with her expertise on
Yes,
their work with
Yes.
GRP.
she's been invited to that meeting as
Yeah,
well.
so feel free to share with anyone that has more knowledge than we do on that. And certainly Ms. O'Bannon, I think, too, has been very vocal in terms of that as well. So we
Would you like me
appreciate
to
you.
just go ahead and send the invitation for August 12th to everybody on the committee? Would that be
We all think.
just for,
What do you
keep
think?
the invitation
I
open?
would say, yeah, okay. That's a
Happy
good
to do
point.
that.
Just make sure we have, as he pointed out, the architectural viewpoint, we point out that we are well intent to on that and that we have ample time to pivot and whatever we need to do, we can do it without duress or concerns. Okay, great. Any other comments, suggestions we talked about priorities for fiscal year 22. That's when the lease ends. Is that right?
October, yeah.
October of 2022 is a reminder for us to be aware of.
And I would say, I mean, I think Mr. Peterson has made this point before, but it can't be underscored enough. This committee will be evaluating in October at your meeting the strategy for our local member dues assessments, and that's really the first stage in our fiscal 2023 budget prep process. So I mean, it's really important that we have a sense of what we're doing around office space, because that has a pretty significant impact on our fiscal 2023 budget. So we need to have a handle on that this fall, really, to know how to approach that planning process next spring.
I was just putting a little fire on the
Okay.
that you're working to understand that, so that we can make sure that all those things fall.
I will do that.
The question asked,
Please, yes, sir.
is what options or what locations are we looking, are exploring to look at for a relocation if we were to not
Sure.
renew? Because that is just a question of just from the city of Richmond's perspective, more importantly, the region, sort of understand a little bit what the aspects are. As you probably could assume, when you've had the membership question come up and change of that, this was a topic that came up as well. And so I just want to make sure that I'm bringing that to this committee as we explore the facilities conversation, because that is not why I'm here. It's part of the things I need to bring to this conversation. And so I felt like I would be remiss if I didn't say that. So just want to make sure I'm offering that option. And also I'm happy to help as needed in some city capacity, or more importantly, just try to facilitate any decision-making that could be needed if the city is a part of the decision-making location as related to, I don't know, things like permitting and other approvals, because that is something that always needs some special attention.
Well, I think that our bylaw, we changed the bylaws, that does still require consent.
Right.
So it could be.
By just proxy,
Right,
and
but
yes.
it, obviously, it's not gonna be in Western Boots or Western Power Trust.
Not that there's anything wrong with it.
No, but it's a long drive from the other end.
He thought I was late getting here for 1:30.
Yeah, I will say one of the benefits of our in-house expertise is we have been able to do a road network analysis. So we have been able to identify more specifically, how we can think about travel time from your respective origin locations. We've used kind of proxies like your courthouse areas or your central office administration locations, but we've identified where from a commute distance those centrally located nodes are, and they are predominantly in the city of Richmond, but also, as Mr. Peterson suggested, are kind of just on the outskirts in some areas just because of how the network works.
It's gonna be about
Transit and parking are also things that have come up regularly in the discussion. I think we all recognize the importance that if we are hosting public meetings, parking and transit are pretty critical to be able to promote accessibility, not just for those of you that are attending as members, but for the public. And so those are on our minds. And I think we will definitely take any jurisdiction up on the offer to kind of help navigate the permitting and review process. So I would appreciate that. And I would also say that we've dabbled in conversations with other entities about co-location and things like that. Those discussions haven't worked out, not for lack of interest, but more a function of either timing or just the realities that our needs are different than other organizations. But I think that there's still, from a management perspective, very much a willingness to co-locate. And so if there are other entities that are in a similar situation and timing that it would make sense financially to co-occupy, I think we're very, very interested in that. Or I have been had the opportunity to experience, for example, leasing office space from the local EDA. We've been kind of the first tenant in on some spec kind of properties that the locality was trying to kind of get going. And so if there were to be things like that, I think, we'd obviously love to be a good partner on those kinds of opportunities. It's a win-win kind of all the way around. So.
Right. What about questions, concerns on those topics?
I have a question.
Yes.
Are we at the 10,000 square foot in this facility? Is that what this
Great
is?
question. Our occupied square footage is right around 10 to 11,000. I will caution you though, because a significant portion of that is hallway here.
Right,
The layout here is not necessarily the most efficient use of space.
right.
The original footprint that we leased was 16,000 square feet. We sublet, and then eventually severed our lease where the LMR space. So it's kind of like that direction. And then that was about 5.5 years ago. And then I guess it's been about 2.5, 3 years ago, we sublet another 3,000 feet to Homeward. So we leased 13,000, but we subleased then about three and some change to Homeward. So we believe that with our current staffing, depending on the need for meeting space and sort of the efficiency fit that we can make, we're probably somewhere between 10 and 12,000 square feet. if we add additional staff, depending on what kind of our hybrid, remote, telework kind of function, out in the community function is, we probably don't need to increase very much more than that.
How long was the lease here?
Oh my. I think we were in our second renewal when I came 5.5 years ago. So it's been, Mr. Peterson or Mr. Holland, do you even remember? It's been.
Been there ever since
10
I've
years?
been, I've been on board for 10 years now. This was been here long before that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were at the Interstate Center before moving here, and it's been a long time we've been here.
And over that 10-year period of time, you discovered you didn't need all the space that you rented initially. And that's when you started subbing out.
Yeah, I can't speak necessarily to the sublease with LMR, because I wasn't here. To be frank, it would have been nice to continue to occupy the space that we had, that we leased to Homeward, but from a financial perspective, there was a need to cut expenses, and
Yeah,
there were not that
revenue.
many
Cut the
options.
expenses, bring low revenue.
Yeah.
So-
We were a little bit upside down a couple years ago, and we needed to right that. And I think we're in a situation. We also, I will say too, and I mean, those that have been around a while, we're paying a premium for the space. I mean, we're paying $2 to $3 more a square foot than what current vacant space and that's just a function of, over time, where things have gone,
Yeah.
So.
And having gone through this last 12 months like we did, do you expect that there to be more office space, more retail space like this, more? in the
Our
past?
advisor said, if I understand your question, and I think
The rate should go
we're
down.
fortunate to be actually looking for space in this time,
Right.
whereas when we were looking for space and shopping
Right.
originally here, it was a
Right.
much different climate.
High demand,
So,
different
yeah.
market.
So I have hopes that we're gonna be in a much different structure from a leasing perspective than we are currently. And that's one of the challenges, expectations that I have set with our real estate agent, that, we need to be in a different situation than we are right now from a finance structure perspective.
But as of right now, 10,000 square feet is probably what we're looking for.
Yeah, I think if we plan well, which we should be able to do, better utilization of space is a great way to be able to keep things, kind of tight and efficient. So I think, we've got a lot of opportunity if we're a little bit more creative with how we use our space. It's going to require, from a culture, if I can say it that way, perspective, every staff member having a giant office with 4 walls and a door might not be the way that we would function, but I think that there's some opportunity to do some give and take there, that staff can still be very, very adequately taken care of, more than adequately taken care of, but we can, be creative.
So I would echo what Mr. Peterson says, that the timing is something that really get pushed on. We need to go. Turn the heat up, I think was your comment.
I'll call her this afternoon.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for those comments. We appreciate the questions, comments, and your response, certainly. Item 5, other items of discussion or concerns from anyone. Anything else we haven't discussed that you'd like to discuss? Gender focus. Any other comments? Any comments? Okay. Period none. Would you like to, is there time to adjourn? Anyone support adjourn?
I do.
Okay, please. I'll take a look.